welcome to episode 120 of the Meet the Farmers podcast. I'm your host, Ben Eagle, and today I'm doing my first ever, I think, revisit to a Meet the Farmers farm. And this wasn't actually planned, but by absolute chance, I was here for episode 22, and we're now 120, so almost 100 episodes ago. But I'm here in Fobbing, in South Essex, with George Young. George, it's really good to be here.
Well, thanks for coming, Ben.
And we're literally sitting around the same table that we were 3 years ago.
Same positions as well.
Same positions as well. We were both at Groundswell a couple of weeks ago. So we will talk a bit about Groundswell as well. But yeah, thank you for having me. Live since 2018, which was the last podcast. Please do, listeners, go back as well to episode 22 and have a listen. It's just interesting to hear the differences, perhaps, in mindset as well. But yeah, so since 2018, how has life changed, both on the farm, but also perhaps for you, I don't know, mindset-wise?
Gosh, an awful lot has changed in the past 3 years. I suppose kind of 3 years ago, I was at the start of the change in my farming journey from a journey which was, first of all, essentially about zero tillage and learning how to farm without cultivations and sort of beginning to reduce sprays. And I was just transitioning to a journey of actually really beginning to think about the food that I'm growing and the fact that I am growing food, and kind of beginning a relationship with people like Hodmedod's, people like Kimberly Bell at the Small Food Bakery, kind of just at that burgeoning point of learning an awful lot about food. And I suppose essentially where I've moved on to now is that is still very much a really key part of my business model and is absolutely something that I've focused on driving forward. But I suppose the stage I've got to now is actually just this, I think the word is obsession. Obsession is definitely the best word to describe it, is an obsession with kind of really bringing nature into every single part of the farm, really sharing my farm with nature and thinking that that is the very most important thing that I need to be doing here on the farm.
So why do you think you've gone through that mindset shift? And do you think that's typical? That's a very difficult question to answer. But I mean, any listeners, if you have been going through a similar mindset shift, I would generally be really interested to hear.
I suppose for me, I've been trying to figure out for myself why I've become so obsessed with ecology and so fascinated by it. And I think it's all kind of rooted in that. But as it happens, I have had a great aunt so my dad's aunt, was also really obsessed with nature. She was an artist, as it happened.
Okay.
And I went to one of her birthday parties, probably her 80th or 90th or something nuts like this. And it was in a wood. So we were having this party in a wood. And then it was revealed to me during this party that actually my Aunt Sheila had bought a corner of a farmer's field and planted a wood, I don't know how many years previously, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, something like that. And this wood was amazing. Yeah. And I knew farming fields, obviously having been brought up on a farm, but I was in this incredible wood and I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. Like my aunt created this wood. That was just magic to me. And so there must be, she was a Jessup, so there must be some of this Jessup blood within me that's making me kind of always interrogate the nature side, the ecology side, all of that. So I think that's a lot of the reason for my mindset shift. As soon as I started thinking down that line, it was very much snowballed. It's kind of, first of all, kind of tinkering around the edges, and now it being so intrinsic to my farming system to really focus on that ecology.
Okay. And you have now a new grand farm plan, and within that, which you've been doing a lot earlier this year, involves planting a lot of trees. Can you take us through the theory and the logic behind those changes?
So this is essentially the kind of the epitome of interlinking a farm and having a kind of a very much shared ecosystem on the farm. So ecology and farming very much sharing the same landscape. And a lot of the design of this came about from a farm meeting I went to a couple of years ago, whereby an entomologist, so insect person, was presenting, and he produced a graph of basically how insects moved out from margins. And obviously, within my ecological system and also my organic system of farming without insecticides, etc., we need our beneficials, our beneficial pests to come and attack any kind of influx of nasty pests that we have coming in. So I knew I needed that kind of arsenal of good insects there. And this map, this graph that he produced basically showed that most of the insects will come out around about 20 meters from a margin, and some will come out as far as 50, and then there's a massive drop off after 50 meters. So his point was you really shouldn't have a field wider than 100 meters, 2 times 50. In my head, I thought, well, hang on, most of the insects come out 20 meters, so surely we can't have a field wider than 40 meters. And so that kind of, as soon as you hear that, and I'd been really kind of thinking a lot about agroforestry for quite some time anyway, and was lucky enough to meet Stephen Briggs a few years ago, and then other proponents of it, such as Mike Mallet, and getting the opportunity to go around Wakeland's agroforestry as well. And it, kind of the sense to me of being able to really link your farm together with these amazing wild corridors, but rather than them being something like a beetle bank, which is quite a common occurrence to try and do this kind of thing, try and provide extra habitat. It's like you get the benefit of a beetle bank, but you also get the benefit of having something that's able to be harvested, potentially in the short term or shortish term, so maybe in 3 to 4 years. But also there's longer term harvest from the form of potentially sap and sugar and timber and things like that. There's the excitement of varying your harvest, but then there's some fantastic kind of additional benefits from preventing disease spread by arresting the wind kind of blowing across your site. Depending on the type of soil you're on, obviously you can also prevent soil erosion, those kind of things. So there are so many kind of amazing things that come out of just that mindset of saying, you know what, my field probably shouldn't be wider than 40 meters. Yeah. And then this also links into like another thing that I think about a lot, and a hashtag that I'm trying to get going. Okay. No one is using it yet, but the hashtag is farming with beauty.
Okay.
And honestly, this field where I've planted all these trees, there is nothing better than walking in on a weekend. I'll take a slower walk with the dog and walk in from the bottom and kind of literally cross every single agroforestry belt with all these different trees in. And daydreaming what it's going to be like in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years time. Yeah. And it's probably an age thing, but I've become a little bit more emotional as I've gotten older. And maybe because I'm a nature nut, who knows? And yeah, like it's a really kind of chillingly exciting thing to think like this is going to look amazing. Yeah. Like it already looks cool, yeah. But it's going to look amazing when these trees are full size, and just knowing the amount of habitat that's going to be there is so exciting.
Yeah. So what's the plan for the next year in terms of the steps that you have to take now in order to get towards that vision? What's happening over the next year? What's the plan?
So the trees are in the first field. I've got a few more to put in at the end of this year. Ones that kind of were out of stock last year, and various things didn't go quite to plan, such as the willows that decided not to grow. Because willows are meant to be easy to grow, which really confused me. But not when you get a drought and a cold period in April.
Doesn't help.
So they need replanting. But kind of I'm actually putting on hold putting some of the other agroforestry fields in yet. Okay. It's a funny thing because whenever you're doing a project of this scale, there comes a point when you have to fix that project. Yeah. But your mind is still constantly doing new ideas. So as I was planting the agroforestry, I was like, well, I've got different ideas I'd love to implement here, such as having curvy tree belts rather than straight tree belts and stuff like this. So kind of, I'm actually looking at something more akin to like a forest garden approach with my agroforestry belts moving forward, and maybe, despite what I said about the insects just now, maybe slightly wider alleys in between because I'm going to have wider belts as well, not to put
Okay.
too much over the tree belts. So those are kind of ideas that are all mushing around in my head, trying to clarify themselves. But the project I'm working on pretty hard at the moment, which actually I think is the coolest project I'm going to have done yet, is the establishment of a wild seam to actually interconnect every single field on the farm. And this is kind of in combination with also adding a lot of ponds to the farm as well. So some of those will be within the wild seam, some of them will be out of the wild seam as well. And so the wild seam is literally carving through the middle of the farm, and will have a kind of wavy edge to it. And the idea is we're actually fencing this wild seam, and I'm hoping, so I'm trying to kind of work in combination with predominantly Essex Wildlife Trust, but getting advice from RSPB, working with Woodland Trust on this as well, maybe a couple of other people. But the idea essentially is going to be to not plant anything in the wild seam. At the moment, that's where my winter bird mix is, so that would form the basis of the stuff growing there essentially. But we won't plant up the actual wild seam itself. Instead, I'm just going to plant up the westerly boundary of it, with the intent to essentially spike the plant diversity on my farm. And so I kind of want to, this is where the Woodland Trust are going to come in, so I want to sit down with them and see if we can get hold of things like, genuinely original wild apples, wild pears, anything kind of like that, old school things that would have been in hedgerows previously. So a massively diverse, mad mix of everything to try and ensure that then there's the chance for new interesting seeds to be dropped in the wild seam. So essentially, and this goes about with leaving various areas on the farm anyway, because the traditional way of farming, where you're going pretty close to, if not right up to the edges, you're never leaving any area for fallen seeds to grow. This is the same true of people who might leave 6 metre margins but then go and top them regularly. If you leave them, there's a chance for stuff to grow. So I'm essentially hoping, therefore, that we are giving enough of the farm over to have the opportunity to wild up. And then essentially the idea will be that in sort of 3 to 4 years' time, when it's well enough established, we will then outwinter our weaning yearlings essentially. So we'll wean our yearlings straight onto that, and they will be set stocked onto that, but at very low numbers. So they'll essentially have the chance then to kind of just casually kind of graze their way around all of that and kind of start to shape the landscape. And then in terms of people giving me bad ideas, RSPB told me about conic ponies, as if I needed more things to think about. So I'd quite like them. And I'm going to see if I can get sign off from Natural England for a few piggies around the place as well, because pigs, obviously.
You had a previous life in banking, so in your mind,
It's a long time ago now, wasn't it?
it was a long time ago now. But let's turn towards the financials and money and the business side behind all these ideas, because it will be going through some listeners' minds, I'm sure. How does all this stack up?
One of the things I did, I guess a year and a half ago now, 2 years ago, whenever it was, we have gone into stewardship in a reasonably large way. My view is that we're in the final few halcyon years of being paid to happen to own a farm. So my view is, say thank you very much and use that money to entirely reshape the business model.
Yep.
And that is precisely what I'm trying to do here. I'm hoping what I'm investing in is the right thing. To me, it feels right. So if it feels right to me, it's got to be. But I mean, with all of that extra money coming in there, in a lot of regards, our financials haven't actually looked better for quite a long time. I've pretty much entirely stopped investing in the conventional machinery. I've got a combine now, which, a 7.5 metre combine that used to farm 1,200 acres that now cuts 350 acres a year.
Yeah.
There's no point changing it. It's a 2013 combine. I wouldn't make any money if I changed it, so we might as well keep that. We've got tractors that do very, very little work. When I established my first arable organic crop. I have got a couple of small bits of machinery to buy for that, but not much. But essentially, I've been then utilising that money to set up things like my flour mill. So I've almost finished the money spent on that. I'll be pleased when that's completely finished because, yeah. Oh, just another £1,000 here. Oh, great.
It's only £1,000.
But that is nearly finished spending. And kind of the model on that I'm feeling very comfortable with, and that model of where I'm obviously vertically integrating what I'm growing with then being able to produce a finished product. I'm very confident in the control that gives me and the ability then to grow much more interesting crops that genuinely don't require the same input that other crops would require. So, financially I feel genuinely pretty happy. And I'd go further and say, I mean, I'm not going to discuss them in depth on the podcast.
I'm not asking you to, don't worry.
But if someone ever wanted...
I'm not going to get your balance sheet out.
If someone wanted to ring me and discuss them, I'm always very happy to talk through those business models.
Yeah. You're clearly very active on social media, especially Instagram, and very open about what you're doing day to day. You've also had, and your model and your ideas here have had a fair amount of exposure. I count myself lucky of being amongst the people who've been able to write about your project. But I'm really interested in what sort of feedback that you've been getting. So let's perhaps delve into George Young's DMs. Maybe not all of them.
Sliding in there. So we've obviously recently had Open Farm Sunday, and I mean, I had I think it's 114. Dad said 110, 114 people came. Brilliant. Which is pretty mega actually. And definitely on the cusp of what's too many for a farm walk. Just about all right in one hit. But
I love the photos. They're all just piling over the hill.
People have very different walking speeds. But I mean, and the funny thing there was actually then it transpired afterwards when pictures went up. There were a load of people from the local community who somehow had missed it. So there probably could have been another 40 people turning up or something. So I ought to do another one if I have the time. But the funny thing is... when I explain the type of farming that I'm doing to people coming around on the farm, people just absolutely love it. They really love it. And I mean, for me, I'm so excited, and I hope it comes across. I think it comes across that
just a bit. I'm
quite excited about, like, kind of especially the nature sort of projects. And in fact, actually, one of the most fun trials to talk about with these groups this group that came round was I'm doing a flax trial this year. So this is flax for linen production.
Okay.
I'm doing this with a girl called Rosie Bristow, who was a costume designer for the theatre, lost her job due to COVID, went and worked for Flourish Produce in Cambridge. She ended up coming and visiting me. We got chatting about fibre. I can't grow hemp on this farm at home due to licensing fund. But flax is essentially the easy entry into the fibre market. I mean, flax is a super interesting kind of area anyway, especially considering how much production we used to have in the UK. Mm-hmm. It is so depressing. And there's some volunteering at the end of July. If anyone wants to come and volunteer, there'll be a chance to rod the crop, which basically means pull it up out of the ground. I love the opportunity to explain those sorts of things to the public and get them to see the bigger picture of what farming could actually be in the future if we directed it in a certain way.
Let's turn towards regen ag, and I'm really interested in your take on how regenerative agriculture is taken hold, I suppose, of the national ag conversation.
I find this a really fascinating one. So I think it's great that it's taking hold at the moment. And I find it quite fascinating that the last year, really, I think it is, there's been quite a large movement of what I would consider genuinely conventional farmers, quite large-scale conventional farmers, actually finally making that move to no-till. I find it a bit of a difficult one because, for me, my conversation has entirely moved away from no-till, especially going organic. But I suppose it is a good start. It might begin people thinking about it. It might help people looking at maybe reducing some of their other, maybe reducing their fungicides, maybe reducing their insecticides, perhaps. But I mean, for me, no-till on its own it's not really even a whimper of regen. So that I find difficult, because I do think there are a lot of people who consider themselves regenerative farmers purely because they've ditched the plough, and I really don't believe that the case. I would actually go further. I'm sure this will rile various people, but I don't actually consider someone a regenerative farmer unless they've got livestock on their farm. Without integrated livestock, you're not doing it. I, for a long time, was talking the talk about that. It's only once you actually make the effort and get stock and the additional work,
You
right,
realise
Ben?
the reality. Yeah.
For me, I think there's just a lot more to regenerative than what maybe most people think. And unfortunately, it's how you reframe the conversation about it, because a lot of the questions that I get are asking, what are my yields like with regenerative? They're asking the question of what my yields are like with no-till. But that makes no sense, because it's not no-till, it's no-till. The part of my farm that's still run like that is no-till, half the fungicides, 2/3 of fertiliser, none of the insecticides. Yeah. That's a very different question to still going and putting on 250, 300 kilos of nitrogen, 4 or 5 fungicides, big old whacks of herbicides. It's a very different question.
Yeah.
And it's actually why I prefer the term agroecology, because I do believe that regen as a term has been somewhat bastardised by parts of the agricultural movement.
Okay. That brings us to Groundswell. I went to Groundswell with the great intention of recording lots of content, talking to no-tillers and the machinery dealers, but instead most of my time was spent having conversations without the microphone on, which, dare I say, in the long run always has its benefits, and it was a great day. I did, however, have some time to sit down with the Dung Beetle crew, Sally Ann Spence, Claire Whittle and James Allen, right at the beginning of the first day, and here's our chat. I'm with Claire Whittle, James Allen and Sally Ann Spence, who are at Groundswell for the whole 2 days, both days?
Both days, yeah.
Fantastic. Talking about their pet subject, which is dung beetles, which we have featured on the podcast before, but I thought it would be really nice just to quickly catch up with them, see how it's all going, and what you want to get out of Groundswell, I suppose, what you're going to be talking to people about over the next couple of days. Sally Ann, how's it all going?
It's brilliantly. I mean, we set up and immediately got farmers and various other sort of livestock organisations coming over to have a chat, which is what we want. I'm speaking later on today at 2:00 about the awesomeness of beetles. I'm going to try and stay within my time limit, but this is an incredible little insect that does so much for the livestock industry, so yeah, it's going to be hard. No, it's been brilliant. We've got lots of interest and very serious interest that actually want to go beyond just coming to our stand. They want us to come out and talk to their cluster groups and their whole of their contract groups and various other things, which is brilliant. That's what we're here for, is that original engagement and then beyond. And we're definitely getting that here, I'd say, straight away.
Fantastic. Yeah. Claire, you, like me, it's your first Groundswell. How's it been so far? What do you want to do over the next couple of days? Apart from being at the stand, of course.
No, it's been great. So, well, we arrived last night and I may have had one too many ciders at the bar, which is great, and is actually only
That's
about
networking.
50.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
about 50, maybe even 20 steps to the pub from the stand, so which is great. And I had cider, which was very, very nice actually, and a steak burger. That was also good. So yeah, food. Drink would be a good thing.
Yep, that's
and
on my
just
list.
having a chat to people. It's been one of the weirdest things for me has been I've not met a lot of people except on social media, and the people saying, "Hi Claire, is that you?" Or me going up to someone saying, "Hello, I think I know you from Twitter." And it's a bit awkward, but it's no, it's nice. It's really nice. It's nice to be out and about with people again.
Yeah, that really is. James, you've been before, so what should we be doing? What should we be looking out for? And how has Groundswell changed for you at all?
It's people. For me, it's the people. I mean, the bit I enjoy most is the evening, not necessarily drinking at the bar, but actually meeting the people at the bar.
Yeah.
So when we arrived last night, as I walked in, someone said, "Oh, James, hi," and I'm looking, going, again, as Claire said, it's over Twitter or whatever, and you get to meet them in person and talk, and you can do more than the talk you just do on Twitter or whatever.
Yeah.
You can actually get to know them a bit and actually hear about what they're doing, and there's opportunities arise as well. You know, we had some guys on the stand this morning that are running a cluster of, I think it's 700 dairy cow farms, and they're really interested in changing how they do it.
Fantastic.
And so that's an opportunity, and it's 10 o'clock in the morning on the first day, and that's where we started. We're running 2 dung beetle safaris over the 2 days as well, so we'll get a whole group of people out into the field,
Brilliant.
getting them gloves on, hands in, looking for dung beetles, which again it just gets that engagement, and hopefully over the next 2 days we'll get a lot of interest and take what we're doing further beyond us.
Excellent.
So for going back to your question, for people visiting, go see people, go and talk to people, because the people here, they're all like-minded, they're all wanting to make a difference, and everyone's chatty, and particularly after the last year, everyone's desperate to talk to people.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
And
people.
quick plug for the website.
www.
Dungbeetlesforfarmers.co.uk.
George, what was your take and experience of Groundswell this year?
To be perfectly frank, I thought Groundswell this year was absolutely fantastic. From a personal point of view, I desperately needed that.
I know how you felt. Yeah. Hence why I didn't do all the content.
Partly from that just release of actually seeing people, but for me it was that kind of confidence build of people being like, yeah, you're doing the right thing, because you don't get that a lot of the time when you're doing kind of out there stuff on your farm. But it was just it was the variety of people who went. And I'm sure some of those people were there to look at no-till drills. Talking about before, that they might be there only looking at things from a no-till perspective, but they can't help but slightly get dragged into these other conversations about things.
Yeah, because yes, Claydon was there, Weaving was there, other brands are available, and that is certainly a big part of the show. I mean, that was my first time going, and one of the things that struck me was having conversations with people who'd been there in previous years and said that this is massive, in comparison to how it has been.
I mean, the lineup of people was just
it's incredible, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, for anyone who's thinking about going next year, how would you sell Groundswell?
Are these people who want to go regenerative or want to have a good time? Because the Wednesday night was fantastically good fun.
Maybe both, yeah.
To be fair, I would actually sell it as in quite a loose way, from the fact that if you want to go and have a really good time with a really mixed group of farmers, and kind of go and see some nice machinery, and find out what new tech there is for that, and maybe learn about fencing products, stuff like that. It's got all of that there. But also, if you want to go and genuinely deep dive some incredible kind of agroecological solutions for things, there was a spectacular talk this time from Derek Gow and Archie Ruggles-Bryce on beavers and the reintegration of beavers. And I'm hopefully going to go to Archie's Spain's Hall, which is only in North Essex, so not far away from me, quite soon. I love the fact that those talks were present, talks genuinely about ecology and doing some exciting stuff in terms of land management, rather than just how do we grow a better crop or breed livestock better or manage them better and things like that. For me, it's that breadth, that proper understanding of actually the question of what should we be doing with the British countryside overall. What does that look like? And the fact that George Eustace was there, the DEFRA guys were there. It shows just how important this movement is becoming. And I mean, the Cherries have just done a absolutely blinding job, and to grow it from the size it was in 2016 when they started,
incredible,
to what it is now. I mean, crumbs! It's just phenomenal. It's just a great way to actually properly deep dive and learn a huge amount about all this movement.
Yeah. Well, George, that's all we've got time for. I'm going to have to leave it there. It's always a pleasure.
Well, thanks very much for coming, Ben. It's lovely to have you
having
here.
me down, and we'll catch up soon. Next time, we're going international. We're heading across the pond over to the States, and we're going to be talking about US policy. So I hope you can join me then. But until then, have a great week.
And that is where I thought we were going to leave it, but I completely forgot, in true professional style, to ask a few questions from Twitter. So I had a quick Zoom call soon after this recording, and I put some of your questions to George. So I put a tweet out asking if anyone wanted to ask you a question, and I've had quite a few responses, and honestly, like quite a lot of responses. But I'm going to pick out some of them. Okay, I wasn't going to read this one, but actually I've just opened it and I'm going to read this. Hi Ben, can you ask George how his head was on Sunday for Open Farm Sunday? He deserved to feel horrific. And that was from Ed. That's from Ed Ford.
It was absolutely fine, thank you. I know how to take my alcohol.
I was going to say, let's move on from that one. Question from John Pawsey. Question to George. George really gets stuck into contentious farming matters of the day. My question would be to George, where do you see your role within the farming industry outside your own farm, given your passion for farming issues to deliver your message?
This is a really difficult one. Because I've thought about this an awful lot. And I would obviously love to see kind of a proper sea change in farming policy and much more of a drive to the linking of farming with food production and much more of a kind of understanding in that and a limit therefore of kind of the unnecessary processing that goes into a lot of food and obviously removes a lot of the nutrition in that process quite often just through over processing of that food. In terms of where I therefore see myself, I don't think I'm a particularly good fit within the NFU. I'm sure many of the NFU would agree with that. I think, I suppose I see myself, obviously I'm trying to set my farm up as, you know, as a really good example of what I obviously feel that you know, an example of what could be possible and what could be some of the solution to where I believe farming should go. But I guess if I'm there just being contentious and it gets people thinking, even if they kind of really rude with me up front, which is quite often the case, if it implants a little seed and that kind of niggles away for, you know, for a year or two and makes some sort of thought change in a kind of inception sort of way, then I'm kind of happy with that as a result. I don't see myself particularly wanting to go into politics, partly because the whole way politics works is silly. But I like the fact that at the moment I'm very lucky and fortunate that I'm able to feed into people like the DEFRA Future Farming team. And if I can continue with that sort of role and feeding in to policymakers at some level, then I think I'm doing what I should be doing.
Okay. I'm going to pick out one more. This is from Rob York. George, how do you marry up being an ambassador for the Beaver Trust, the Soil Association, and a food campaign organisation when sometimes there may be competing narratives to be articulated between each interest? That's a very Rob York question.
I mean, they actually came in that order as it happens in terms of being asked to be ambassadors for these. I was delighted to be an ambassador for the Beaver Trust. I think, unfortunately, the way my farm is sited, it's unlikely we're going to get beavers, certainly in fobbing. We have got another bit of land that it would be nice, but it requires a lot of landowners to come together to enable beavers to be there. With regards to Soil Association, I'm not a general ambassador for the Soil Association. In fact, I'm even, you know, my organic membership is actually with Organic Farmers and Growers anyway. But I'm an ambassador for the Soil Association within their agroecological farming sort of narrative. So as it happens, I see kind of the beaver argument, which is very much a kind of land sharing sort of, you know, version of farming. I see that ties exceptionally closely with the work that I am doing with the Soil Association. And then similarly with the Real Food Campaign, this is all actually about farming in a way which produces really nutritious food, which, you know, a lot of farming produces nutritious food, but as I said earlier, it's that link between kind of food and then, or between the crop that's grown and how that is then processed into a food product is really important. And for me, and as part of the Real Food Campaign, that's really what I'm going after. So that's just a matter of saying, well, for me, I want to grow my crops organically in an agroecological way, with nature very much part of that system. And I then want to make sure that crop, which ultimately is likely to have a lower yield than a crop with all the inputs put into it, my aim is to ensure that that lower yielding crop is transferred into a food product where as much of that nutrition is brought through to the final product and made bioavailable, to ensure it has the same worth essentially per hectare as a mass produced product going into a slightly poorer food chain. So really that's where I don't actually see there are any conflicts of interest between those three organizations. And if anyone else wants me to be an ambassador, hey, just let me know.
Okay, we're going to leave those questions there, but thank you everyone for sending in your questions. And that really is it for this episode. Thank you very much for listening. And as alluded to earlier, next week I'll be speaking to Bill Northey, who is a former Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation at the USDA. He's also an agriculture consultant and a farmer from Iowa. So I hope you can join me then. And until then, have a brilliant week this week.